So, good afternoon, everybody. Um, I'm going to have to keep looking this way to see the slides, so hopefully I'll manage it. So I'm going to talk to you about how EPD, you know that bit, how EPD, environmental product declarations, are kind of working in terms of supplying this information, hopefully digitally, to enable the circular economy to work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the links between circular economy and life cycle assessment, which is the kind of underlying process, about EPD and the information that's there, and then about how EPD are being digitized, and then a little bit about some tools that are kind of taking that forward. So in terms of life cycle assessment, the kind of information that I think is essential for the circular economy to work, we basically need to know how to reduce energy consumption and increase the proportion of energy that's being used that's from renewable sources. We want to minimize the risk. So if we want to be recycling materials that are coming out of buildings in the future, we need to know now that the materials we're putting into buildings are going to be safe when they come out. So we have a kind of, if you like, a very we need a risk-averse approach to the materials that we're using to ensure that they can be recycled in the future with no problems. So we need information about what's in products in order to kind of assist that. We want to look at minimizing kind of toxicity and those types of impacts when we're actually making things at the moment. We want to try and stop mixing products so that we can make use of renewable resources in a renewable way and non-renewable resources separately, and to maximize recycling, to look at how we can actually do that and the benefits from that process. So that's kind of information I'm looking for EPD to provide to enable that to happen. I think Jane's already said we're kind of, hopefully you know about the circular economy. In terms of life cycle assessment, you do quite often see it in this kind of linear approach, and we talk about something like cradle to grave, and that potentially implies that when we're doing life cycle assessment, we're assuming everything goes into landfill and can't be recycled, and that it's a linear process that we're measuring. That isn't the case. That was potentially the case when it first came into use, but now it's much more common that we're actually modelling recycle processes and recovery processes and actually looking at the benefits that those bring. So although we talk about a cradle to grave EPD, what that means is that it's going through the whole life cycle, including the different things that happen at the end of life and the benefit of that recycling process. So in terms of the circular economy and EPD, as I say, this is the kind of standard EPD, the template in terms of the different life cycle stages. So at the beginning, you've got the manufacturing process, then taking the product to site, then the use of the product, the end of life of the product, and at the end, we show the benefits that happen from any recycling and recovery processes that are happening through that life cycle. And what actually happens in an EPD is that there are these loops. When we have these recycling processes, it's linking back and being used as raw materials in the input processes, and we're looking at the benefits that's actually occurring. So we do kind of follow this whole circular approach when we actually do an EPD. So in terms of the information on the inputs that's actually provided, an EPD should provide information on the input materials that are used. So it should provide you information on what's actually going into your product, and certainly at a minimum anything that's covered by the kind of REACH directive, so substances of very high concern. So you have that knowledge to look at what might cause you problems in the future. I admit it could be better, but it does as a minimum do that. You've also got information on the amount of secondary material that's used and the mass of the product, so you can actually understand the recycled kind of content of the product. And you've also got information on the amount of renewable energy that's used, and you can actually renewable material that's used. So again, you can look at that. In terms of renewable energy, you've got measures of the renewable energy that's used as materials, as energy, and then the total energy, and also energy that's coming from waste. So all of that is kind of quantified in the EPD. So again, you can understand the kind of energy cycles that are actually going as you kind of look at it. And then in terms of recovery processes at the end of life, the EPD provides you with information for different kind of routes. So EPDs can, for example, provide information about what happens to the product in landfill, what happens to the product if you recycle it, and what happens if you use it for energy recovery. And you can look at those 3 different routes and understand the relative benefits and impacts that occur from those. So you have information on what is actually available for reuse, for recycling, for energy recovery, the amount of energy that's exported, how much waste is actually produced. And as this information module D shows you the benefits of those processes. So if you recycle for something with high impact, then you have a greater benefit than if you're recycling for a lower impact product. There's work ongoing in terms of the European standards for environmental product declarations, and this kind of arises from PEF, but that also has a kind of circular approach. So they've asked us to look at this, and as part of that, there will be a mandatory provision of end-of-life data for all products. The only exceptions will be something like cement, which effectively doesn't come out of a building as itself, it comes out as concrete. So a concrete product will have to provide an end of life and information about any benefits from that recycling. And that's the same across all construction products. So that will be coming in probably sort of the beginning of next year if that amendment gets voted through, which it should, I hope, do. And there will also be more indicators provided. So there will be an additional mandatory indicator that everybody has to provide on water scarcity, so not just the amount of water that's used, but how scarce that water that has been used is relative to kind of the river basins. And there will also be optional indicators, for example, on toxicity, they're listed there. So there will be more information about the kind of impacts associated with products, hopefully. So EPDs are about products, but they do the aim of EPDs is not just for manufacturers to understand the impacts of products and for people to understand which product they should be buying, but to actually enable the assessment of buildings. And really, in large part, it's buildings that are the products that we're looking at in construction. We want sustainable buildings. You can put a whole load of sustainable building products into a building and have a terrible building that doesn't work. So it's the building that we're kind of evaluating. So it's essential that this product level EPD data that we put into the building is actually, it's kind of feeding into the assessment at the building level. You can see that the structure for both of these is exactly the same. So the data kind of directly feeds up. And just to explain that a little bit more, if an EPD provides, for example, information just about the manufacture in this first block, the second block about the transport and installation on site, and this last block about what happens to it at the end of life, then the information can then be used. If you're just using a cradle to gate EPD, you just use that information and you can assess the impact of the building literally just based on its materials, but nothing else. We then have what we call cradle through construction. So it's going to take account of the impacts of moving all those products to the construction site and installing them. What happens to the waste? What energy is actually used to do that? And that information just feeds directly up into that EPD. And then if we include all the replacements, now quite often for a product it won't provide that information because it's just one product life cycle. So at the end of life of that product, it doesn't include the replacements unless it has maintenance processes. So this information at the end of life is the same end of life that you have when you replace that product through the life cycle. So you can use this information here to actually generate, for example, the impact of refurbishment. It's the same manufacturer of the product, the same transport to the site, the same disposal. And then if you go through to the end of life, again, you're feeding this information through. So that's kind of how this information feeds through to calculate building level impacts. Just in terms of digitisation, so there are huge numbers of EPD available. There's over 5,000 EPDs to the European standard already out there. Not all of them in English, but the majority of them are in English. Basically you just need to know kind of where they are. But if you use the Eco Platform website, that has links to all the programs, so you can find them. And of those EPDs, this was work that I did at the end of last year, but of those EPDs, over half of them provide information beyond the cradle to gate. So I think people think that EPDs just provide the manufacturing information, but the majority of EPDs, where we know what they produce, as in the kind of data is easily accessible, the vast majority of them actually are providing information for large parts of the life cycle. So there is a lot more information there than perhaps you imagine. In terms of what data is already there available digitally, there is, in Germany, the government there is very proactive. It's lovely to see. So the German EPD program provides all their EPDs as a digital download. It's free. Anybody can download it. You just need to register, and you can use that EPD data, that digital data, in any tool that you want to. So just go ahead, use it. It's there. And the government also funds something called the ecobuild, the environmental kind of building database. That again is free to download. So that's German EPDs for German products, and it also includes generic German construction material data where there isn't EPDs. That is also available free to download and for use in tools. So go and use it. Unfortunately, it's in German, but and both of these use this ILCD XML kind of format with additional fields for EPDs. In France, their national database, in France, if you make any claim about a construction product environmentally, you have to have an EPD to support it. That database you can buy to use, well, tool manufacturers can get their tool checked, and then that tool is available, and it's a very small price there, €10 per user. So that data is free. In the Netherlands, again, it's regulation to do building LCAs with their Building Act. They have a Dutch national database. If you get your tool approved, then the database goes into your tool. In Austria, they have a free database. In the UK, there's the BRE database, which tools can apply to use. We don't know how much that costs. We believe it costs. And the international EPD program in Sweden is piloting the provision of digital information. So all this data is out there and available to go into tools already as we speak. And from my point of view, having this data in tools, kind of BIM compatible tools, is the way to make this evaluation at the building level way easier. Just to say, there is ongoing work in ISO, so international standards now, to basically ensure that we have a standardized format for providing EPD data into BIM. So there have been these initiatives already. It's pretty standardized and agreed, but there needs to be a bit more information, particularly, for example, over the use of scenarios. So these end of life, it's no good just providing the data for transport to site if you don't actually tell somebody that it's by truck and it's 100 kilometers, or it's by ship and it's 1,000 kilometers. If you don't have that background information, you can't decide whether you can use that information or whether you need to change it. So this work is ongoing. The work item started at the beginning, just towards the end of last year. And we hope that we'll be working in parallel with SEN at a European level as well to try and ensure that this work applies sort of globally going forward. Just a little bit here on some tools. So I work for a consultancy called Thinkstep. We've been working with Schuko So we produce kind of tools that manufacturers can use to produce EPDs across their entire range. They don't have to do the EPD one by one by one. They have options to design their product and then immediately get the kind of EPD through. So we've done this. They have their Schucal tool, which will produce EPDs straight off with the German program. And they've just been using that information that we generate from that tool, and they've now got circular economy, cradle to cradle certification coming from the data from that tool. So there's this direct link between what's being done in life cycle assessment and cradle to cradle. We also, in the LCA work that we do, we have a tool that we've developed to follow the circularity indicators that Ellen MacArthur Foundation have developed. So if we do an LCA for you, or if you do an LCA using our software, you can add on this information and get the circularity indicators. And that's it. So thank you very much.